Okay, dear participants, guests, and distinguished speakers, good afternoon. I am Captain Sukhjit Singh, overall program leader for Maritime Studies at the Center for Maritime and Ocean Studies of the University of Trinidad and Tobago. I'm also honored to be Deputy Director and Technical Head at the Maritime Technology Corporation Center, Caribbean. So give me a quick thumbs up if you can hear me loud and clear. Great. So hence on behalf of the MTCC Caribbean, Center for Maritime and Ocean Studies, I call CMOS at the UTT, I'm very pleased to welcome all of you to our first event in the series of webinar Wednesdays. However, before we start, I would quickly request that we all make sure that our microphones are muted when we are not speaking, and especially when presentations are in progress. For any questions and comments, please use the chat and we will take it up during the panel discussion. In case your internet connection is unstable and it is lost momentarily, Zoom will automatically attempt to reconnect and restart itself to rejoin the webinar once your connection is restored. Should you experience any trouble rejoining or need any assistance during the webinar, please send us an urgent email or text. Please also note that webinar session will be recorded and it will be available on our webpage for later reference. So once again, I welcome you on this platform for the first session in the series of our webinar Wednesdays. The University of Trinidad and Tobago was selected as the host institute for establishing a regional center of excellence under the project formerly known as Capacity Building for Climate Mitigation in the Maritime Shipping Industry. The project is implemented by International Maritime Organization and funded by the European Union. The Global Maritime Technology Cooperation Centers Network, GMN in short, and commonly known, was established between 2016 and early 2017 with 5 centers located across the globe, one each in Africa, Asia, Caribbean, Latin America, and Pacific region. Initially, GMN was spanned over 4 years, which began in 2016 and completed in December 2019. However, the 2 extensions now allowed the MTCCs to continue their work and effort in building regional capacity for the implementation of IMO emission regulations, which is MARPOL Annex 6, and the decarbonization of maritime operations. We are therefore very grateful to the European Union and IMO for this continued support in this extended period as we work towards financial sustainability. MTCC Caribbean was established in December 2016 and launched in March 2017 at the University of Trinidad and Tobago's Center for Maritime and Ocean Studies. Since its establishment, the MTCC Caribbean has established strong regional networks and supported the maritime administrations of the region with capacity building initiatives, activities, and technical expertise in the field of maritime energy efficiency and greenhouse gas emissions knowledge. To date, MTCC Caribbean has hosted 2 regional workshops, 6 sub-regional workshops, and 1 targeted training workshop with participation of over 550 participants. Members of the MTCC Caribbean team also participated in 33 regional and global events, bringing invaluable information and knowledge to the project and relaying it to our stakeholders via our capacity building workshops. During this period, we also completed 2 pilot projects providing baseline studies for the technology on board ships and their operational efficiency, and establishing an online voluntary reporting system on fuel consumption from the ships calling Caribbean ports. This was supplemented by a technology needs assessment for energy efficiency in maritime shipping for the Caribbean region. Going forward, we look to support the region by 3 major activities, first of which is the webinar Wednesday series covering 4 major themes of promoting the ratification and implementation of MARPOL Annex 6, which we all are participating today. In addition, we have themes of implementation, monitoring, reporting, and verification of Sulfur 2020 compliance, the inclusion of domestic maritime emissions under NDCs, and decarbonization of maritime transport. These will be covered during the first 3 Wednesdays of the November, respectively. This will be followed by an online training program on maritime energy management and the implementation of MARPOL Annex 6. We expect to launch this in January 2021. And our concluding deliverable for this extended phase will be to facilitate a virtual energy efficiency conference cum exhibition for the Caribbean region in the last week of February 2021. There are some additional plans of joint training activities for the PSC inspectors of the region with World Maritime University and Danish Maritime Authority. We should be able to share the details as soon as they are finalized. Further, while we are navigating these challenging times, our programs and research at UTT's CMOS has been continuously engaged in building capacity as we answer regional and national expectations. The CMOS faculty is very privileged to have been involved in supporting various IMO activities in the region. The acknowledgement of UTT during the last 2 Senior Maritime Administrators workshop highlights the catalyst role we can play in the regional maritime sector. However, we strongly believe that this is a direct result of the support and advocacy of our stakeholders and maritime administrators of the region that are privy to the capacity of this young university. Therefore, I take this opportunity to thank you all once again. Now to our eminent speakers and participants who have joined us from all over the world on this virtual platform, I once again bid you a very warm welcome. We are indeed honored to have you here with us. Over the next 2 hours, I look forward to your participation in this meaningful and productive discourse on promoting the ratification and implementation of MARPOL Annex 6. At this moment, now I would like to welcome our very own Professor Marlon Knights to bring welcome remarks on the behalf of the host institute, the University of Trinidad and Tobago. Professor Knights is the Assistant Vice President for Research, Impact and Postgraduate Studies at the University of Trinidad and Tobago. In addition, he holds the portfolio of Program Professor of the Bioscience, Agriculture and Food Technology program at UTT. In his capacity as Assistant Vice President, he has the oversight and responsibility for all postgraduate research, resource mobilization, externally funded projects, and partnership coordination and engagement. He has been a perfect guide to us with his extensive experience in grants, consultancies, implementation, and management both locally and internationally. Please welcome Prof. Knights.
Hi. Thank you very much, Dr. Ralvi, CEO IR Consilium, Mrs. Rambarat Parasram, Director of Maritime Technology Corporation Center for the Caribbean, MTCC. Captain Singh, thank you for that wonderful introduction. Program Lead, Maritime Studies in UTT. Deputy Director and Technical Head of MTC Caribbean. Other distinguished panelists, Dr. Kalea, Mrs. Moses, Mr. Samba, and Ms. Russell, welcome. Invited guests, good afternoon, and thank you for allowing me the opportunity today to bring greetings on behalf of the University of Trinidad and Tobago. As Captain Singh indicated, we are a young university, and we are very proud and happy to be engaging in this initiative. As I do so, I would like to reassure you of UTT's ongoing commitment to support climate change action in the region and to minimize the exposure of its inhabitants to air pollutants and air toxics. As outlined in the National Development Strategy, Vision 2030, some of our main national challenges include transforming the existing economic growth model into one that is environmentally friendly while addressing climate change. This would no doubt include reducing greenhouse gas emissions and air toxics, but it would also include building resilience to its adverse impacts and protecting and sustainably using our environmental resources. To this end, as a national university, UTT remains committed to play our role in mitigating these challenges through relevant and targeted capacity building initiatives and through strengthening our research and development. The MTC Caribbean has proven to be one of our most dynamic and revolutionary contributions towards national and regional climate change action. As we are all aware, climate change is a global threat for many reasons, including rising sea levels, more intense heat waves and hurricanes, alongside other extreme weather events. With increasing shifts in climate change and climate patterns worldwide, there will continue to be greater frequency of wildfires, droughts, as well as increased precipitation. These changes are likely to cause significant impact to a number of industries that contribute to the global economy. As Captain Singh indicated, I hail from the area of food and agriculture, and I have indeed seen firsthand the impact of the agriculture industry, both locally and internationally. In multiple countries, the agriculture industry has been severely affected and continues to be, posing a threat to major global food supply chains. Food security is among the areas anticipated to be at risk at the global, regional, and local levels due to climate change. Like so many other industries affected by climate change, the shipping industry has not been unscathed. With the shipping industry being responsible for more than 80% of the volume of world trade, this vital transportation channel is unlikely to emerge unaffected. Indeed, research is overwhelmingly pointing to the need for shipping to adapt quickly to minimize the potential negative effects of climate change to productivity and cost, while simultaneously, and as important, reducing its contribution to greenhouse gas emissions that contribute to climate change. UTT, through our strategic engagement with the IMO, is supporting the Caribbean region as we work towards climate change action that will have a positive impact on our future. Through MTC Caribbean, we have the opportunity to utilize powerful analytical features, including environmental efficiency trends and predictive analytics, to better track emissions and fuel consumption data of ships within the region. UTT has also had the opportunity via the MTCC Caribbean to work together with our Caribbean counterparts and support capacity building and training initiatives to improve data collection on ship emissions and fuel consumption. This type of data will undoubtedly be critical if, as a region, we are to be compliant with the standards set out in MARPOL 6. As the host institute of MTCC Caribbean, UTT has ratified our continued partnership with the IMO as we look forward to continued collaborative initiatives and interventions to not only reduce emissions within the ship industry, but towards a safer and cleaner environment for the Caribbean region. I wish you all a productive, informative, and rewarding session, and thank you again for choosing UTT to partner with. Captain Singh?
Thanks, Prof. Knights, for your continuous support to the research at the University of at UTT to us, and in general and very specifically for your guidance and support to MTCC Caribbean project. Thank you very much, sir.
Thank you.
Dear all, now, as we know, the theme for today's webinar, promoting the ratification and implementation of MARPOL Annex 6, has a direct impact on national, regional, and global dimensions. Therefore, it is imperative to discuss positive approaches influencing the best industry practices, including examining the role of various stakeholders. We have with us today representatives from global and regional organizations, maritime administrations, ship owners and operators, from people from universities and researchers. I look forward to this session as a platform for thought leaders, practitioners, academics, and researchers to share their ideas and views, while at the same time challenging all participants to think more about the solutions within our existing frameworks, which may in turn inspire new and practical recommendations towards implementation of MARPOL Annex 6. Therefore, without further ado, I would like to introduce Dr. Ayan Ralvi to take us through the next part of the webinar. Dr. Ralvi is founder and CEO of IR Consilium, a family firm that provides leading advice and assistance on international affairs, with particular emphasis on securing, governing, and developing maritime spaces, and on protecting natural resources. He is globally recognized expert in wide range of areas, including maritime strategy, integrating security, governance, and the maritime economy. It includes maritime law and security, especially identifying and addressing evolving and emerging threats. He is a senior fellow at the Global Energy Center of Atlantic Council and previously spent 3 years as a maritime crime expert for the United Nations Office on Drugs and Crimes Global Maritime Crime Program, and 4 years as an adjunct professor at the US Department of Defense's Africa Center for Strategic Studies. Having worked in and with more than 80 different countries and armed with both an MPhil in international relations and a PhD in politics and international studies from the University of Cambridge, he continues to serve as an expert advisor and consultant for various government agencies, international organizations, and private sector entities. So please welcome Dr. Ayan Ralvi to take us through the main discussions.
Well, Captain Singh, thank you very much. Professor Knight and the entire MTCC team, thank you so much for this opportunity to be here with you all and to facilitate what I hope will be a very engaging, interesting, and productive discussion on promoting the ratification and implementation of MARPOL Annex 6. This is an incredibly interesting topic, and it is vital that we be talking about it now, because for several years I have traveled around the world discussing IMO 2020 and MARPOL Annex 6 in different contexts. And we've now come to the place where this is a reality. And so how does that reality operate amid an ever-changing environment? The 2020 global pandemic has certainly changed how we've all had to live this year. And I think it's really relevant to revisit MARPOL Annex 6 and its impact on shipping and the supply chains, both for fuel and for the goods that transport the sea, are transported by sea. I want to underscore just how different it is to ratify something versus to implement it. A lot of my career has focused on the laws that have been ratified by countries, but never implemented. And I think this is one area where even countries that have very good intentions may not yet have an idea of how to implement it. And the implementation, as a result, has largely fallen to the private sector. And to highlight that, I want to share a very quick anecdote before I hand over to the speakers. I think it was October, so almost exactly 2 years ago, in 2018, I was in Miami for a conference, specifically about IMO 2020. And while I was in Miami, I got to go on board a vessel that had had some experiences with converting their engines and trying to get ahead of the curve on implementation. And so they had divided up their engines between marine gas oil, MGO, and using scrubbers with high sulfur fuel oil. And it was a very interesting experience talking with the engineers, because they relayed a number of funny stories. But the one that I want to share with you it goes directly to the issue of implementation and the gap between our understanding of MARPOL Annex 6 and how it actually functions. They were underway, and they were starting to run low on fuel, and they were using their scrubbers, and the scrubber went down. And they immediately radioed the US Coast Guard to say, we're very sorry, we are currently non-compliant, our scrubber has gone out of commission, and we are trying to get it back online. We expect it to be back online within an hour. And the US Coast Guard's response was, well, thank you very much for letting us know. This is really helpful. Just one question. What's a scrubber? And that's, that lack of even awareness of what we're talking about, I think, underscores the importance of this conversation. So I just want to really encourage all of us to participate widely and to really be open about asking questions and engaging. This is a topic where we all have something to learn, and so I hope we'll approach it from that perspective. So let me give a couple ground rules about the conversation, and then I'll hand it over without further ado to the speakers. Number one, I want to underscore that good ideas have no rank. So no matter how senior you are or junior the speaker may be, please listen to everyone speaking. Please listen and consider what they're saying, because this is particularly an area where seniority has little to do with the quality of the ideas coming out. This is an area where all of us have something to contribute. This second rule is perhaps most of all for me, because I fall afoul of this all the time. Please speak slowly and clearly if you are speaking on the camera, so that we can all understand and hear each other as clearly as possible. Number three, not all of us speak acronym. And sometimes the acronyms mean different things to different people. So please try to spell out the words that you're using rather than divert directly into acronyms, because they can get very confusing very quickly. I recently had a conversation with a bunch of technology providers and a bunch of maritime operators. Everyone was talking about SAR, but one group was thinking synthetic aperture radar and the other group was thinking search and rescue. And it took about 15 minutes for us to figure out we were talking about totally different things. So let's make sure we try and spell out the acronyms the first time we use them. Number four, the only bad question is the one that does not get asked. So please feel free to ask the questions. And to that end, we have several ways you can do that. You can write your question into the chat function, and I will be monitoring that and making sure that the speakers get an opportunity to answer them. You'll also have the opportunity to engage in the discussion once we have completed the presentations. And I will also put my own WhatsApp into the chat as soon as I conclude this and hand over, so that if anybody doesn't feel comfortable being visibly asking a question, they want to do it anonymously, you can ask me directly and I will pose it without attribution. That also brings us to the point of recording. This is on the record, so please keep mindful of that. And to underscore how important it is that we have an open discussion, we're not here to disparage each other. We're not here to disparage any company. We're not here to disparage any country. So this is about having an honest and open discussion, and we are welcome to be critical, but let's try not to attack anyone or any entity. because that does not bring us any closer to getting MARPOL Annex 6 implemented as it should be. I've already said this, but I'll say it again because I think it's the most important thing I can bring up, which is that no one has this solved yet. No one has this understood fully yet. We are all learning. And so humility should be our guiding principle today because we all have something to learn. Finally, I really encourage everyone to have fun and enjoy this. This is a technical discussion, but at the same time, it's a very interesting and very important one. And so we should be able to enjoy this. And so please engage openly, engage fully, and enjoy the next few hours. So to that, I will get out of the way now and start turning over to the speakers. And it's my delight and pleasure to introduce a friend of 8 years now. I first met Vivian in 2012 at UTT. I will share with you a little bit of her bio, but I will just tell you as a personal matter, she is of the most exceptional character as both a human being and a lawyer. So Vivian Rambarath Parasram is a lawyer of over 20 years with expertise in maritime law, international environmental law, corporate governance, and commercial law. So she has a lot to bring to bear on this particular topic. She's been affiliated with UTT since 2007 and joined the faculty full-time at the Maritime campus in 2008. During this time, she's developed degrees and courses that are specifically designed to fuel and develop the local and regional maritime industry. She's heavily involved in the Caribbean's development as a maritime center of excellence. Vivian is a course leader for a suite of maritime law courses ranging from marine environmental protection to admiralty law. Before she joined UTT, she was for 9 years a principal investigator and researcher, and eventually officer in charge of the Legal and Policy Research Program at the Institute of Maritime Affairs. She also spent 3 years in the business, energy, and tax practice area of Lex Mundi law firm of M. Hamill Smith and Company. And during the span of her career, Vivian has frequently and successfully managed major commercial and academic projects. Her primary areas of interest are maritime border security, marine surveillance, and determining methods for overcoming legal and institutional challenges to maritime regulatory reform in the Caribbean Commonwealth. So she is on deck now. Will be our next speaker, John. But Vivian, the floor is yours for the next 10 minutes, and we look forward to hearing what you have to say.
Thank you very much, Ian, and wonderful to have you here with us. This afternoon, launching straight into my presentation, I want to focus on a very different aspect of implementation. We have heard the term, and I've tried to introduce it at several of our sub-regional and our regional workshops with our maritime administrators and stakeholders across the region. And when I use the phrase non-party stakeholders or non-state actors, I tend to get blank stares because it's usually the persons that we're conversing with on implementation. It's usually our maritime administrations. And we have paid a lot of attention and we've well documented the challenges that maritime administrations face and the hurdles in trying to achieve implementation, not just of MARPOL Annex 6, but several other maritime-related conventions. So that's why today, and especially given the content of our other webinars, where we will be looking at the roles of the private sector and the ship owners, we are looking at the role of non-party stakeholders and how we can engage them. And some may think that, okay, this is a fairly trivial role, but I don't think in the Caribbean or in Trinidad, we give sufficient credibility to what these non-state actors can do and how they can actually facilitate implementation. So with that, and to give, So to give the background in terms of why am I prioritizing this as an agent? So this afternoon's presentation was premised on the following. Non-party stakeholders can strengthen institutional capacity and meet enhanced institutional obligations. Tevin, you took remote control of my screen.
Momentarily. 1 second.
So, can I have it back?
Almost there. Okay, at the top of your screen.
Okay. Am I getting it back now?
I'm about to give it back to you.
Okay. Warning to all presenters, my technical secretariat will be doing this to you as well. May I have it back now?
Hold on.
This is the joy of living in a virtual world.
Okay, so you get to look at the message that's on the screen and let it resonate. My other 2 clicks were to justify this in with support from academic writings, because you know we like to justify and say these are the authorities on why we're doing this. So, Tevin, anytime now?
Oh, I gave you back control. You don't have it back? There
I
you
have
go.
it back. Okay, so as I was saying, just to justify what I was saying in terms of the role of non-party stakeholders, their inclusion as implementers, as agents of change, as agents of implementation have been studied, have been documented, but I don't think as a Caribbean region we've done this enough. So we need to essentially spend some time having a conversation as to how do we engage our non-party stakeholders? How do we engage our non-stake actors as implementers? And what I'm also going to share with you this afternoon is some evidence that we have seen of these actors working and bringing about significant change within the region. So I'm going to look at initially, first I've categorized 3 non-party stakeholders that I consider are priorities for the region. Cities. It's been well documented that cities can be major change agents with respect to climate action. This is particularly so for the Caribbean region because in most of our ports are located either within or within very close proximity to our cities. As a result, cities play a very important role in terms of their design, their planning, and how they facilitate implementation. So, you know, I'm sure many of us here that have logged in can recognize the picture below with all the traffic congestion. And we can identify to this. Sometimes, even though in the pandemic there is reduced commuting, this is not an unusual sight. In fact, this is the norm on the roads of Trinidad and Tobago. Then we have the ideal, where we would like to actually have holistic planning that takes into consideration all that we need to achieve for clean air, for enhanced well-being of society, for you know, with recognition of all of the SDGs. How can we achieve better implementation in our cities? And they are recognized as major partners. And one working paper that was done by the Stockholm Environmental Institute identified that cities have the ability to reduce GHG emissions by 3.7 gigatons in 2030 and up to 8 gigatons by 2050. Now, I can't even imagine what that is, but I can imagine it's something very good for the cities. Our technical team and perhaps Mr. Nanan himself can explain how good that would be, but I consider that would be significant in terms of enhancing human health and well-being in the city. Private sector. Private sector remains an untapped resource so far in terms of climate action within the Caribbean. Even with our experience with implementation of the MTCC over the span of the last 4 years, we have seen most of our technology providers coming in from overseas. And yes, we do not have the research and we don't have the cutting edge research to compete in technology development, particularly in shipping. But there is, aside from the technology providers, there is an opportunity for a private sector to be a part of small efforts, initially small efforts in climate mitigation. And all of these small efforts, they add up. So what I've highlighted here, for example, there are two firms locally that I know of personally that have, for example, employed remote working as a major part of their decarbonization exercise. So BP started remote working well before the pandemic, as did Price Waterhouse. In terms of the decarbonization efforts, they also studied and quantified the impact to human health and well-being, and they also explored the gender diversity paradigm and ensuring that women were better included to make their contributions in the workspaces through the facilitation of remote working. So the private sector, in terms of the business case for climate action, is already made to several of them. And of course, it's dependent on the type of business that you're involved in. Of course, if you're a ship captain, you can't do remote working, not quite yet. We haven't gotten to autonomous shipping yet, and I'm not sure as a seafarer training institution whether we really welcome that just yet anyway. So in terms of the business sector, what we've also been seeing is governmental, not the private sector, but we're seeing governmental digitalization coming in as a major reform in terms of also facilitating remote handling of matters, where you can apply, where you can process things within your governmental authorities remotely. And Trinidad and Tobago, as well as several Caribbean countries, have started the digitalization method of the government as a means of coping with the pandemic in the first instance, but also in support of their climate action, as well as in response to the need to enhance our productivity index. So we do have a path, we do have precedents, and the case study I have on the side here is one that was done in 2017. And over there, they estimated that just measuring the remote working of 3.9 million workers, the carbon savings resulted in what was the equivalent of the planting of 91.9 million trees. So I think the business case, the environmental case for remote working has been made. It's just for us to ensure that we are in fact properly implementing it, and by all means ensuring that it is not facilitated to the detriment of productivity. In fact, some of the studies that have been coming up as a result of the enhanced uptake of remote working is that some of the tech majors in particular are leading the way in that they are recognizing that they are achieving and producing a lot more remotely, and so in some cases productivity has been enhanced as a result of the remote working. And all of this, of course, in the context of what it means in terms of handling congestion, transport. We saw in the early pandemic stage when China had locked down, there were reports of certain areas, the air was the cleanest it has ever been in decades. In India, there was certain towns that never saw the Himalayas in their lifetime were able to see it. So there's a lot to be had to be discussed in terms of climate action. And the private sector has been leading the way, government timidly following, but there is an opportunity to engage. The next major role I want to look at is the role of NGOs and civil society. NGOs, of course, represent a significant spectrum of interests. And of course, there are some of them in the private sector. They include environmental groups, academics, local governments, and municipal authorities are sometimes also considered as part of NGO and civil society. Women and gender, and I'm so very happy that we actually have representation from two, well, not NGOs, but aspects of non-party stakeholders and civil society sharing this panel with me, because through their presentations, we're going to see their very direct contributions. And one of the things, and some of you may recognize the picture I have here in terms of NGO and civil society, as well as the person on the screen. And for those of you joining us across the Caribbean who may not have been following, this is Gary Aboud, who is the president of Fishermen and Friends of the Sea. And he was responsible, I would credit him, to raising a significant awareness of the case of the Naparima, which is a double hull floating storage tanker that is located in the Gulf of Paria within proximity to Trinidad, but not in our territorial waters, in Venezuelan's territorial waters. And it is a vessel that has raised considerable concern because of reported lists. And oftentimes, as regulators, what I've found is that regulators tend to look at NGOs as nuisance factors, or they're at it, they're sensationalizing again. But it's their role. That's how they agitate, that's how they sensitize, that's how they build awareness to propel action. So I would credit a lot of the agitation and the newspaper coverage and the news coverage was, to me, as a direct result of the social media agitation of Fishermen and Friends of the Sea. And this is one example of an NGO that isn't just about, you know, talking and agitating and sharing information. What you would see in the next slide is where they actually do litigate to try to change government policy. So they do walk the talk, and they put their money where their mouth is. And there's opportunity, and there's evidence of other NGOs doing the same thing. So one of the examples I'm going to give to you is one with Trinidad in one of our cases in terms of the smelter operations. As some of you may recall, Trinidad and Tobago was about to host, where they were given an environmental clearance. The company, an aluminum smelting company, was given environmental clearance to begin smelting operations in Trinidad. But this NGO appealed. So, and they are very effective advocates. The picture on your right, on your left, actually is a snapshot of the case study where, you know, several civil society organizations joined together. So you had Pure and RAG joining together to appeal the case of the certificate of environmental clearance that was issued for the smelter. Then we had other cases where Fishermen and Friends of the Sea appeal decisions of the EMA all the way to the Privy Council. These are not cheap activities, but this is evidence of where civil society is holding government accountable for things that they believe is environmentally wrong. And within our environmental legislation, Trinidad and Tobago's environmental legislation, we have that opportunity, and we gave that opportunity when we created the direct private party action, which allowed any citizen to represent before the court on behalf of the environment. And we've also seen similar action in Belize. And we have, again, a further case of Fishermen and Friends of the Sea targeting not just the EMA, but also a major energy player in Trinidad, Atlantic LNG. So what you have here is evidence where our non-party stakeholders can make a significant impact to governmental policy. So what we need, and what the conversation I want to have this afternoon, is how can we effectively bring them and institutionalize them as part of the conversation on implementation. So I'd like to close with that. And my question in closing, again, is how do we harness this potential in the maritime domain? Ian, I hand over to you.
Thank you very much. And I think you've really set a fantastic tone and really underscored how important this matter is, not just to one entity or one industry, but it is really a whole of society question in terms of how we address marine fuels and the very important issue of environmental pollution from ships. So I think this is a fantastic starting point for our conversation, and I'm now delighted to introduce our next speaker. And before I do that, I want to give a little bit of a public service announcement to our speakers to avoid being hijacked by technical pirates. I think it's really important to put yourself into full screen mode when you are presenting. Otherwise, it will prevent you from being able to fully share your screen, and so somebody will take over and interrupt. So just when you are going to put your slides up, please switch into full screen mode. I hope that covers what's needed to be said for that technical side. So now let me introduce our next speaker from the International Maritime Organization, Dr. John Kalea. John completed his PhD at University College London in a very relevant field of designing ships for lower greenhouse gas emissions. After his PhD, he secured further research funding to develop a holistic ship energy model, leading the engineering effort in a techno-economic model of the shipping sector. During this time, he also worked in a consultancy role with leading shipping companies and led the Royal Institute of Naval Architects delegation to the International Maritime Organization's Marine Environmental Protection Committee, MEPC, meetings. And these are very relevant to this particular conversation, as it is the MEPC that is responsible for driving MARPOL and its implementation. John joined the IMO Secretariat in 2018 and is responsible for the running of the IMO data collection system, the Energy Efficiency Design Index database, and is an IMO expert for matters related to air pollution and energy efficiency. As a member of the Secretariat, he is also responsible for delivering the outcomes of the Marine Environmental Protection Committee and PPR meetings. So, John, the floor is yours. John, are you with us? I think you're still muted.
Okay, yeah, I'm sorry, I'm just getting my presentation up. Okay. Okay, great. Yeah, thank you very much for the introduction there, Ian. Okay, so I'm just going to explain a little bit of background to MARPOL Annex 6, and then also a bit about parties and non-parties, and yeah, just to explain. So at the moment, I'm on the Secretariat for IMO, so I'm responsible for a lot of this discussion. And a lot of the work that I've been involved in last year has been about consistent implementation of the sulfur limit. Okay, yeah, so I'm just going to give an overview of MARPOL Annex 6 very quickly, just what it's about. And I'm going to talk a little bit about greenhouse gas emissions, because there's a lot of discussion ongoing at the moment related to this that might lead to future updates to MARPOL. I'm also going to talk about the technical cooperation and activities at IMO. And then the final part, which I'm going to spend a bit more time on, I'm going to talk about the obligation of parties and non-parties to MARPOL Annex 6 and what they mean from a legislation perspective. Okay, just to explain a little bit, I know you guys know you know a lot about IMO and what we do. So MARPOL itself actually has 6 different annexes, and then some of these annexes aren't compulsory, and so there's optional ones. And so MARPOL Annex 6 is a optional annex itself. I think the other thing is it's worth keeping note of. There are actually 4 conventions outside MARPOL as well, which are relevant to preventing pollution. And that's the London Convention, which is related to it's related to dumping of waste. You've got the Ballast Water Management Convention, the Hong Kong Convention is ship recycling, and you've got anti-fouling systems. So as separate conventions, these things have their own requirements in terms of how they become ratified, but they are related to prevention of pollution too. Just to explain more now about MARPOL Annex 6, mainly the kind of main parts is Chapter 3 and Chapter 4. So Chapter 3 covers ozone depleting substances. Well, I'm not going to read these out, but I'm just going to explain a little bit more about NOx and SOx. But it covers all of these aspects. Chapter 4 is mainly covers energy efficiency regulations. So this energy efficiency design index for new ships and the ship energy efficiency management plan and the IMO data collection system. So I'm going to just talk a little bit more about NOx, SOx, and some of the energy efficiency regulations and what they are. The NOx regulation in MARPOL is actually based on the engine itself. So the engine has to meet the tier 1 or tier 2, sorry, tier 2 currently or tier 3 requirement in order for that ship to go to sea. We also have these things called emission control areas. So a party to MARPOL Annex 6, they can also set up areas which they can have more stringent regulations than other areas. And that is one of the benefits of becoming a party. You can also set these control areas. One of the other aspects of Chapter 3 is the sulfur limit. And this graph just shows how that's developed. So initially it went to from 4.45 to 3.5%. And now, as most people are aware, from the 1st of January this year, we've now gone to 0.5%. I've been quite involved in this work, and I think one of the things to stress is it was quite successful because a lot of people knew it was coming really early on. So several years before it was in MARPOL Annex 6. The thing that was also in MARPOL Annex 6 was a review clause, which looked at whether the fuel oil could actually be made available. And after that review happened, then the committee could decide, yes, okay, we think the fuel oil can be produced, so we can go ahead with the regulation. And so many stakeholders are involved. You know, in the last couple of years, it's been a lot about consistent implementation of MARPOL Annex 6. And what this means is, so we don't just, you know, introduce this regulation, we're trying to help people to meet the regulation. So when it does come into force, it has an impact. We do things like, I mean, we have the MTCs, for example. You know, I was actually in South Africa last year as well, and that part of that was to help to explain what this regulation is and how it could be enforced. So there's all kinds of activities around this regulation. So this slide just summarizes all of the regulations related to energy efficiency in MARPOL Annex 6. So the Energy Efficiency Design Index, which is like a design standard for new ships, this is actually a mandatory standard. So new ships under this regulation have to meet a certain you know, energy efficiency requirement. The other thing we have is a ship energy efficiency management plan, which is also mandatory. So that has to be kept on board the ship. And this contains information on what you might be doing to make the ship energy efficient, and also plans for measuring, which is quite important to see how efficient your ship is and what you might do to make it more efficient. And the more recently, there's been changes to this to introduce a data collection system. So during last year, every ship above 5,000 gross tons has been collecting data on how much fuel consumption they've been using. And then this year, all of this data has been sent to administrations and then sent to IMO. And then this will then be used to produce a report of the committee. And then we can see exactly what the fuel consumption is of the international fleet from the onboard data. So this has been quite a big task also that I've been still involved with at the moment, actually. I'm going to talk just a little bit about some of the greenhouse gas aspects as well. There aren't mandatory requirements for some of this, but it's currently an ongoing discussion. So we have, at the moment, we have this design standard for new ships. And the current discussion we're having at IMO is about having a operational standard for existing ships. So this would mean that ships currently at sea, they'd have to meet a certain standard, or they'd have to be they'd have to have a certain amount of efficiency. Because at the moment, even though we do have this regulation, the Energy Efficiency Design Index, it's only for new ships. And we also have these things called greenhouse gas studies, and we're now on our 4th one. So this slide is just summarizing this study that was produced this year. So they're actually like, these studies are kind of several years apart. And then the point really is to they explain very well, they're very kind of a good scientific basis on what exactly is happening with shipping and what's happening in the future. The main outcome from the current study is that if we continue on the same business as usual path, so we don't introduce things, like there's not technologies or fuels introduced in shipping, that kind of thing, then emissions are set to increase. And this on the left just shows what the amount is. So we expect by 2050 it will be 130% of the 2008 emissions. And the other thing, I'm not going to explain too much on this, but another really key thing was in 2018 we had an initial IMO strategy on reduction of GHG emissions from ships, and it's important because it set a target for shipping emissions, and it set a plan for IMO future work that will potentially lead to instruments to reduce emissions from shipping. Okay, I'm going to talk a little bit more about the technical cooperations aspects as well. So I guess the easiest way to explain it is with some of the regulation, we do a lot, MTCs are a good example. Some of what we do is helping people to, so for example, so if they do ratify MARPOL Annex 6, then they can be assisted in that process. And they can also understand if that's right for them or not. This slide has just very, they're the projects we have at the moment, and they're all kind of the major environmental projects. So, and you can see, we have the GMN MTCC listed there. We also have another project. There's all kinds of things, but we have, so we have projects assisting more developing countries and teaching them about MARPOL Annex 6 and maybe how they can do things which you guys have been doing, like how do you monitor your energy efficiency, that kind of thing. And we also have some of the projects more related to, where businesses have got together and they've decided they want to do something to reduce emissions, and that's more what the Glow Meet project and the Green Voyage project do. Okay, just the last 2 slides is just, so just to explain a little bit more about what we mean by parties and non-parties. So if you're a non-party to MARPOL Annex 6, you still might be involved in the discussion. Like you still have position at IMO, you're still signed up to the IMO convention. But what it means if you're a party, it means that you'll actually be responsible for upholding the regulation. And this is, the relevant thing there is the relevant article there is Article 1, which is basically states that parties are responsible for upholding regulation. With non-parties, obviously you don't have the same obligations under MARPOL Annex 6. Unless you are in the waters of a party, then you still may have obligations of MARPOL Annex 6. So, and what this is it's MARPOL Article 5.4, and this is a really important thing. It's basically about no more favourable treatment, and what it means is if you're a non-party, even though you may not, you're not a party, the ships in your fleet still may have to meet the party conditions if they're going to visit a port that has the standards of a party. And so that's the difficulty with being a non-party, because you may still need to be a party. You may still need to live up to those standards. So if you have to support these standards anyway, then the benefits of being a party is that you can help express your environmental concerns. So the next slide just gives just a quick summary of the reasons why you may want to become a party. It's like saying this, sometimes people do want to be non-parties because they might not have the resources to be able to support MARPOL Annex 6 or enforce it. So there is this, but I think one of the other important considerations as well. So I talked about no more favourable treatment, and the other kind of aspect to this is that a lot of the world's fleet have ratified MARPOL Annex 6. So 97% of global tonnage have ratified MARPOL, and that's something else to consider if you wanted to be a if you wanted to be a non-party. It's likely that you will encounter parties, especially if if it's a shipping company. So as a summary, I think the last 2 paragraphs there is just summarizes that. Okay, I think that's everything. Yeah, just also I just want to say thank you very much for inviting me as well to just give this presentation and explain some of this. Thank you.
John, thanks very much for highlighting what it actually means to be a party and what the convention actually says. And I think your presentation has really helped put the convention and Annex 6 in particular in context. And I think it will help with all the rest of the conversation. So thank you very much. Our next speaker is Mrs. Raquel Moses. Her career has focused on catalyzing change that brings about transformation. And she has enabled leadership in organizations around the world to go beyond their current vision and stay on the cusp of what's next. And she does that now through the Caribbean Climate Smart Accelerator. She's become a critical advisor for driving the shift to digital, for process automation, and for implementing key turnaround projects that heighten customer management and strengthen organizational performance. She's very well known for her ability to build coalitions, and her success in the public and private sectors has allowed her to drive important advancements on world-changing topics that require regional consensus, such as climate change, sustainability, and building resilience. So, Mrs. Raquel Moses, the floor is yours.
Hi, thank you so much. I really appreciate it, and I'm absolutely thrilled to be here with you today from the Caribbean Climate Smart Accelerator. So I'm going to start by telling you a little bit about Malcolm Gladwell. He's my favorite author, and I was lucky enough to see him speak some years ago and to meet him. And he said at this talk, when you're speaking to a room of experts, don't tell them about what they know. Tell them about what you know. And considering that I am absolutely speaking to a room of experts here, I'm going to tell you a little bit about the Caribbean Climate Smart Accelerator and how I believe that we can help in implementing this MARPOL thing. So one of the things that I've learned in the role that I have now is that people who are in and around the ocean are keenly aware of what is taking place from a climate change perspective, and I find them far more empathetic than other folks who just don't get as much exposure. So divers, people who certainly marine pilots and the like, really seem quite tapped in to climate change and what's taking place. But on the same token, they know that all is not well. They know that something's going wrong, and they are keenly interested in taking some action as long as it doesn't impact their bottom line for the most part. So I am a complete novice to this area, and so I'm going to throw up my hands and tell you that when I tell you that I'm going to tell you about what I know and not what you know, it is because I have been largely unexposed. But if I look vaguely familiar, it is because I used to head up Microsoft, and I headed Microsoft Trinidad when we launched a pollution monitoring buoy in the Gulf of Paria to using IoT devices to be able to collect information and to manage and monitor pollution. I am a technologist by career and by heart, and so for the most part, you know, when you're a hammer, you think everything's a nail. Because I'm a technologist, I really believe that technology can solve most issues. So I'm sure there are people who are holding up their hands and saying, okay, so why is that relevant to me? Why do I care? And I'll tell you a little bit about the Caribbean Climate Smart Accelerator and what we do, and hopefully it'll bring it full circle to you as to why we're even here talking to you at this event. So we would have been implemented at the end of the hurricane season between Hurricane Maria and Irma. And we were formed because 3 prime ministers and Richard Branson got together and said something needed to be done about the impact of climate change in the Caribbean, because these storms are getting increasingly fierce and difficult, and we keep getting decimated each season. And so the Caribbean Climate Smart Accelerator was born. There are 4 key services that we provide to the region and 4 main areas that we implement. And that will help to give you some context into our relevance. So we have a coalition of 27 countries. Trinidad is the most recent to join. I think it's probably around 3 months old that Trinidad has joined the coalition. And we're a nonprofit organization. And there are 4 key things that we do. The first one is that we build economies of scale. So where we see 2 or more countries working on a very similar project, we get them to work together in hopes of bringing either investment, best practice, or suppliers together to be able to use that to apply to the project to make the project happen more quickly. We bring blended financial instruments. So we are currently building a blended financial instrument to address solar and to increase the implementation of solar across the region. But we have in mind several other blended financial instruments that we are looking at. And we bring innovation to the table. So we work with the likes of Google.org and a number of different organizations that have the ability to bring technological solutions. And I'll tell you a little bit about a couple of the things that we're working on and that we've seen that should be relevant to what we're trying to do here. And then finally, and thank you so much for the first speaker for introducing it, we bring the private sector. So we have a full database of private sector players, and as we work on our implementation areas, we bring the private sector to the table because we think the government is best placed to look at implementing policy, but the private sector is where you really see the action taking place. And so that's what our hope and ambition is. So the 4 thematic areas that we work in, and the 4 sort of major bodies of work that we undertake. The first one is creating a climate smart map for the region. And in doing that, what we want to be able to do, and it ties in well to the value that we provide, is we want to be able to understand where are we now and what are the goals that we have and how do we get from where we are to our end point and what is it going to cost and what are some of the mechanisms that we can use to fund that implementation. And the second thing is 90% renewable for all. So we're working across the region to be able to get as much renewable energy implemented as possible. Our goal is 90% for the region. Some countries, 1 or 2 countries, well, one country is at 100%, but many of the other countries, if they just implement their nationally determined contributions and they don't get to 90%, it would really be quite impactful. And then we work on the implementation of 30 by 30, which is protecting 30% of the ocean and 30% of the land. And this is where our work in this area will fall, because there are some really, really interesting nature-based instruments that we believe can help us to fund some of the transition that we are talking about. And I think one of the biggest challenges that we see across the region is that we have the best of intent, but until we can figure out how to fund the implementation, we are stuck. And you know, I really loved what Dr. Rambaran said about you know, people needing to hold their governments accountable. But I think it's even more important than that. Governments will do what they believe we want them to do. And so we really have to start setting our intention and making sure that they are aware. And all that we need to do is to help governments figure out how to pay for it. So then the final thing that we do is build the region's economic and physical resilience. And that 1.5 is there because we're trying to limit the warming to 1.5, but also what we want to see is 1.5 million jobs. And a lot of those jobs we want to see in the blue economy, because we think that by building our physical and economic resilience, at least when there is damage and when change is taking place, we are not only funded to recover, but we are also funded to be able to respond. And our goal, in a nutshell, is to turn this climate action vulnerability that we face into an economic opportunity, because that's the only way that we are going to have the impetus to make the changes that need to be made. If we have the ability to export intellectual property, know-how, solutions, etc., then we have the ability to not only get people's attention on what we are trying to do and to care about the things that impact us, but also to make money off of it so our survival is doubly dependent on it. So some of the solutions that we're seeing is blockchain to manage the marine value chain. So for example, using fish DNA and implementing that on blockchain, so you can tell whether or not fish is illegally fished, etc., which we think is really a phenomenal application of the technology. We also work really closely with a company called Literati, and they help to geolocate trash and tie it back to the company source. What that helps us to do is to find opportunities to fund either cleanup efforts or things that impact, that ultimately end up in the ocean. And then another project that we're working on is electromobility, including electric marine vehicles, and to do that at scale. And that is a huge challenge, but if we can start creating solutions that we can then export, then we're way ahead of the game. So if there's only one thing that you remember about the Caribbean Climate Smart Accelerator and how we are relevant to this fight that we're in to implement MARPOL 6, is that we find ways to pay for things. And until this makes economic sense, it is going to be impossible to implement. So that is our focus, and we thank you so much for your time and for having us as a part of this discussion, because we want to be a part of the solution. Thank you.
Raquel, thank you so much. That was incredibly interesting. And I think what you just said about what is being done to use fish DNA and to geolocate trash is something that is probably interesting to everyone. And I am dying to talk to you more about it later. It is a really interesting glimpse into the wider context of addressing pollution in the marine environment and ensuring the long-term sustainability of not just the marine environment, but the blue economy itself. So I'm looking forward to talking more as we go along. I'm now, though, very pleased to introduce our next speaker, Mr. Frederick Luke Samba. He is from the MTCC Africa, and he is an energy efficiency expert. He graduated from the University of Agriculture and Technology in Nairobi, Kenya, with a degree in mechanical engineering. He went on to sail around the world and obtained a Chief Marine Engineer Certificate of Competency from the Maritime and Port Authority of Singapore. He is currently working with the Kenya Maritime Authority, dealing with flag and port state ship inspections. Frederick is also part of the team supporting MTCC Africa, being part of the partners together with the Kenya Ports Authority and the Jomo Kenyatta University of Agriculture and Technology. So Mr. Frederick Luke Samba, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Ian, for the introduction. Thank you very much to MTCC Caribbean for the invitation and to the UTT for organizing everything. Thank you also to the other panelists and to the participants for their participation during this webinar. It is about 9:12 in Mombasa, Kenya. And I'm glad to join you to talk about ratification and implementation of MARPOL Annex 6. MTCC Africa is part of the GMN network, for which MTCC Caribbean is part of. I'm going to talk on the African perspective on ratification and implementation of MARPOL Annex 6, which is the main reason for the setting up of the GMN. Just a brief background, there are 54 countries in Africa, out of which 10 have ratified MARPOL Annex 6. Of these 54, 17 are landlocked, meaning there are 37 countries that would need to ratify the MARPOL Annex 6. Those that are sea facing. And in Africa, most African countries, the process of ratification is a high-level decision. It is a political decision. In most cases, it is initiated by the cabinet or a senior member of government. And before he does that, he must obtain the benefits that would accrue from ratifying a convention. You would have to establish what would be the cost of the implementation, what would be the acceptability of the convention, and if there is any scientific research or reason to support it. For the case of Kenya, it goes further that before we ratify the convention, the National Assembly must approve it before the executive deposits the instrument of ratification. And after which it is registered and it is known that a country has ratified it. Therefore, for countries to ratify these conventions, there must be political action, which is coming from the executive. There must be a benefit that accrues from ratifying the convention. And for MARPOL Annex 6, there could be pressure from, for example, environmental groups to support the ratification for the other countries in Africa that have not ratified. As Vivian had explained in her presentation, we could have pressure from the port cities to really talk and advise that this ratification is important, and that there would be benefits that would accrue from the ratification. There should be pressure from the academia that would advise them that there is scientific evidence to support the action, for example, that MARPOL Annex 6 is calling for. And therefore, we see these as the major actions that can be taken in order for MARPOL Annex 6 to be ratified, to be accepted in Africa and the world over. On the part of implementation, the implementation could be divided into three. A party could implement the convention as a flag state, where the ships are flying the flag. as a coastal state where the ships are passing their coast, or as a port state where ships are calling their ports. For this implementation, there has to be domestication, meaning that regulations will have to be developed, which will determine who is the competent authority for the implementation of the regulation. There will also be need for coordination of the implementation, where it involves many agencies taking it into play, implementing it. There's also be need to include the offenses clauses, which are not included in the convention itself. And there'll be also need for public participation and acceptance of the requirement of the convention. For our country, the implementation would be divided between very many agencies. For example, the Environment Agency, the Maritime Authority, the Port Authority, the Energy Regulating Authority, and the Standard Regulating Authority. And they would be implementing certain aspects. For example, on the application of the fleet, it would be done by the administration. On the issue of ensuring fuel oil availability, it would be ensured by the Energy Regulating Agency and the Standard Agency. On the issue of port reception facility, it would be implemented by the Port Authority. And therefore, it means there would be need for cooperation and coordination between the many agencies in implementing MARPOL Annex 6. There is also the need for implementation of the port state requirements for the ships calling the ports. And for this matter, it is mostly covered by the maritime administrations. On the part of MTCC Africa, we see challenges that would occur in implementation as being the availing of resources required for implementing this convention. There would be the challenge of the operating model for ports, which are different, some that are public run and others which are privately run, and therefore there will be need for a different mechanism and way of implementing and enforcing the requirements. The international implementation of MARPOL Annex 6 is key in ensuring that it is effective and that there is an harmonized and international mechanism for which this convention is applied. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. I think a lot of what you just said is really helpful for understanding both the process of ratification and implementation, as well as the challenges from a governance standpoint. And your point about the different agencies really resonated, as I've done a lot of work on how do you create the interagency mechanism to be able to handle a multi-agency approach to legal implementation. And I think I would go further and say, what you seem to be underscoring is it's an interagency and public-private and public non-state approach that's needed, as there are so many different stakeholders to make MARPOL Annex 6 a reality in practice and not just an idea on paper. So thank you very much. That was incredibly helpful. It's now my pleasure to introduce our final pair of speakers who will be presenting jointly. And it's a great honor to introduce both Ms. Lisa Russell and Ms. Sarita Mahabir from the Women in Maritime Association of the Caribbean. Lisa is an attorney, so you're surrounded by lawyers today, and currently a partner with the legal firm of Russell & Russell, where she practices in commercial, conveyancing, and maritime and probate matters. She's been a member of the Jamaican Bar since 2006 and has focused in litigation. Something is popping up.
That's our poll.
Okay. All right, we have a poll coming up now, so please make sure you respond to that as I continue to introduce Lisa. So as I was saying, she was an associate in the litigation and maritime departments of Myers, Fletcher, and Gordon, and she focused on both general civil and commercial litigation. In addition to that practice, she's lectured part-time at the Caribbean Maritime Institute, which is now Caribbean Maritime University in Jamaica, and has focused on the subjects of business law, maritime law, and then both maritime law and international conventions. She has worked full-time on a consultancy basis with one of Jamaica's largest logistics facilities, as well as Jamaica's Environment Trust. She holds a LLB, a Bachelor of Laws, from the University of Liverpool in the UK. She has a certificate in legal education from Norman Manley Law School, a Master of Business Administration from the Manoa School of Business at UWI, a diploma in international shipping and logistics from the Caribbean Maritime Institute, and certificates in both mediation from the Dispute Resolution Foundation of Jamaica and maritime disputes and arbitration from Lloyd's Maritime Academy. She's also a certified mediator and notary public for the island of Jamaica. Her professional associations include memberships in the Jamaican Bar Association, the Intellectual Property and Alternative Dispute Resolution Subcommittee, and the Civil Practice and Procedure and Social Affairs and Outreach Committees. She's also a member of the Jamaica Environment Trust, Women in Maritime Association in the Caribbean, where she is serving as the Vice President of Women in Development on the Governing Council. And most recently, she also became a member, a fellow, I should say, of the Chartered Institute of Arbitrators. So she will be speaking first, but let me also go ahead and introduce her co-panelist or co-presenter, Sarita. Ms. Sarita Mahavir Lee is a graduate in Environmental and Natural Resource Management with minors in Marine Biology and Human Resource Management from the University of the West Indies. She furthered her studies at the UTT in Maritime Studies with an MSc in Operational Maritime Management, so she's very familiar with this particular institution, and thanks again for their host of this event. Ms. Mahavir Lee also has a background in sales and finance. She spent 8 years with the local banking sector, 4 of them in customer relationship management, and 3 years facilitating education at the tertiary level. As an instructor too at the Maritime Studies Department, she is the course leader now for the courses on the BSc in Nautical Sciences and Marine Operations and the Diploma in Maritime Operations, specifically Engineering, Navigation, and Navigation Options. During her time at the university, she has organized events such as the annual World Maritime Day celebrations and the campus open days and outreach activities. So I am delighted to hand over the floor to the Women in Maritime Association of the Caribbean. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Dr. Ralvi, and good afternoon, everyone. It's a pleasure to share with you some of the work WMAC has been doing and our role in the implementation of MARPOL Annex 6. Sarita will be sharing the presentation for us. So slide 2 really is just an overview of what WMAC does and our strategic focus. As indicated, we are a network of professional women from 14 states and 60 independent territories in the Caribbean, established to enhance the development and participation of women in the maritime sector and contribute to the growth of the industry within the region. We were launched by the International Maritime Organization in April 2015 at a conference held in Montego Bay in Jamaica. In terms of strategic focus, 3 key areas include empowerment of women through thought leadership, leveraging of opportunities, mentorship, inclusion of men as allies, and strategic alliances. Also research, advocacy, and action for evidence-based growth. Partnership projects with the entities that I've listed here before, but I'm going to just briefly overview International Maritime Organization, International Labour Organization, and World Maritime University will assist us with the implementation of a customized cost-effective mentorship and peer-to-peer support program on a phased basis. UN ECLAC, which is United Nations Economic Commission for Latin America and the Caribbean sub-regional headquarters will help us with the implementation of a research agenda on the economic contribution of the maritime sector to Caribbean sustainable development, and maritime administrations with the inclusion of data on the status of women in the maritime sector in their reporting, as was agreed last year at the regional high-level symposium and workshops held at the end of February into March 2019. So the UN Women and CSA, which is Caribbean Shipping Association, as well as CARIBMEPA, I'll go more in depth on a little bit later. Next slide, please, Sarita. So slide 3, we're talking about leveraging our strength in terms of partnership to engage women and girls in climate action. And this will include producing tools, the design and leading of industry seminars, research, influencing policies and programs, the use of technology, and supporting growth of the sector while working with entities like MTCC Caribbean, CARIBMEPA through dedicated projects and at sub-regional and national levels, CARICOM, the OECS, which is Organized Eastern Caribbean States, and key regional agencies, as well as governments to implement STEM-friendly education policies and gender policies, thereby making dominated sectors accessible for all. Slide 4 really gives an overview of the international standards relating to climate action, which we know the overarching international framework is well established and well noted, so I won't go into that. Slide 5, engaging women and girls in climate action. Knowledge sharing for informed action. So CARIBMEPA Save Our Seas is really a collaborative effort in recognition of the need to engage in robust and sustained advocacy efforts for the preservation of the marine environment. Education must start with the sensitization of our children to the importance of saving our seas based on its high level of significance to sustainable development, in particular SDG 14. We'll be focusing on promoting marine industry best practices, as well as educating seafarers, students, and the public about the need and strategies for protecting global ocean, lake, and river resources. Involvement of various stakeholders, including governments, private sector, schools, NGOs, and the public in general is key. Our founding members include the Organization of American States Inter-American Committee on Port, RAC Rampatech, the International Maritime Organization, the Caribbean Maritime University, the Florida Caribbean Cruise Association, and WEMAC. So in terms of WEMAC's contribution, it will involve deliberate work at national and regional levels on the protection of the Caribbean through MARPOL and other mechanisms, advocating for a dedicated MARPOL training institute and knowledge resources on MARPOL, and application of a gender lens to all work on marine environment protection and sustainability. Next slide, please, Sarita. Engaging women and girls in climate action in terms of collating and using data for development. We have a joint project with the Caribbean Shipping Association on gender equality and mainstreaming. It's really our gender rights champion initiative with male allies. It's geared towards increasing awareness of gender rights in the sector, thereby enhancing decision-making, advocacy, knowledge management, and gender mainstreaming through technology, policies, and programs that support growth of the sector. Components and indicators developed jointly involve educating, sensitizing, and building knowledge regarding gender rights as human rights and the dynamics of gender and the work-life balance within the sector, eroding stereotypes and misinformation, gaining allies, and quelling misconceptions about women taking over jobs, the inclusion of the male perspective in research to better understand and address concerns regarding gender equality in the workplace, and allowing for better gender policies that benefit both men and women, and addressing cultural norms, innuendos, and long-held understandings that prescribe and limit women's work contributions. We've also launched a webinar series to increase awareness. Sorry, 1 second, my slide went away from me. Right, so we've launched a webinar series to increase awareness and education, embrace new trends for sustainable development, introduce available technologies, as well as business considerations due to the COVID-19 restrictions for personal and professional development. During the summer months, WEMAC and CSA jointly hosted a 3-part series entitled Caribbean Shipping Post-COVID-19, a Roadmap to Recovery and Sustainability, Some topics included facilitation of trade and transport in the Caribbean region, the human element in shipping, enforcement and compliance. And then we'll also have another series which will focus more on wellness, but also offering a more expansive training to cover general professional development, blue economy, and use of technology. I'll now hand over to Sarita.
Thank you very much, Lisa. So Lisa, as Lisa just highlighted, these are some of the areas in which WEMAC is, or Women in Maritime Association Caribbean, is engaged. And this speaks very much to our first presenter's question of how can we capitalize on these non-governmental organizations and their contribution to climate action and promoting sustainable development within the region. As she said, WEMAC is involved in deliberate work at both national and regional levels. At the national levels, we have national liaisons who are very much integrated into the maritime sector of the Caribbean islands and who can contribute and provide feedback as to where the needs lie and where WEMAC can capitalize on these needs in order to address them. One such partnership that we have was addressed, which is CaribNEPA, which is a big one for us. We also have the Caribbean Shipping Association, as Lisa highlighted, and MTCC Caribbean, for whom we are presenting today, is also one of our major partners. And in partnering with MTCC Caribbean, we aim to engage the sector in climate action and raise awareness of these climate action activities that are taking place. Engaging women and girls in climate action with specific reference to the Sustainable Development Goal 13 and specifically targets 13.3 and 13.B, which speaks to our involvement in climate action. I won't go too much into that because I am conscious of the time that we are allotted. But just to say that women and girls have been highlighted in the research as being particularly vulnerable to the effects of climate impacts. And so this is a very key area in which we must engage the sector and engage the involvement of women and girls so that there is a say in the decisions of the future, giving a voice to those who would be most likely impacted by these activities. We also aim at this partnership, and we are engaged in doing it, of building the capacity of women in maritime on technical measures and the legislative requirements for reducing greenhouse gas emissions from shipping and increasing energy efficiency. And this has already started by MTCC Caribbean providing such expert advice and capacity building to us through our webinar series. In terms of research, we are also engaged in a research agenda with our various partners. We have already conducted research to create a maritime baseline survey tool for the Caribbean and data that will help our maritime administrations to make informed decisions by understanding who is involved in the sector, at what levels, and how it can be developed. We also are working on a research agenda with the United Nations Economic Commission for Latin America and the Caribbean. And this will involve various aspects of understanding the participation of women in maritime within the region, as well as understanding their economic contribution to the sector and what that diversity can bring to the sector, in addition to the off-spin of impacts and areas where we could contribute in terms of climate action, in terms of commercial, technical, and other areas. We are also, as Lisa highlighted, very much engaged in promoting the understanding of gender and creating a standard guide for the Caribbean sector on gender, what gender mainstreaming means, what gender equality means, etc. And the gender dynamics of climate change and the issues of girls and women in small island developing states. While it is stated in the research globally that women and girls are most likely to feel the impacts of climate-related events, we need to understand specifically how that relates to small island developing states in the Caribbean and in the Caribbean as a region. Some benefits of the activities that we've been doing include increasing that development and participation of women in the maritime sector and increasing that development of the sector within the Caribbean region as well. Creating these dynamic partnerships with regional and global allies, which actually strengthen the port and shipping industry, mainstream gender in the sector, and provide a host of benefits when we look at development socially, economically, and culturally. Cultural and policy shifts over time for Caribbean girls to occupy strong positions in climate change and the promotion of STEM and in shipping for these groups. We are also very much engaged in lobbying for the development of national gender policies, which includes the consideration of climate action and women and girls in the maritime sector. And with that, we thank you for allowing us to present today, and we are quite happy to answer any of the questions that you may have in the discussion section.
Thank you so much, both Lisa and Sarita. That was absolutely fantastic. And from my own perspective in working in the maritime sector around the world, there are a few topics more relevant than women in the maritime sector right now, because I think worldwide, that is the segment of the wider maritime conversation that is showing the most dynamism. And it's interesting that you say that women and girls are perhaps the most vulnerable to the impacts of climate change and climate issues. But I'd also say that women and girls have shown to also be the most effective in having impact on the discussion and the implementation of effective approaches to dealing with the climate. So I think the role of women and girls in the maritime sector is growing really rapidly, and it's a phenomenon that needs to be embraced and supported in every way possible. So thank you very much. I want to thank all of our panelists for fantastic presentations. And now we have the opportunity for a group-wide conversation. And we've gotten a number of questions. Some are in the chat. I've also received one privately, and I will put that one out first because I think it's a really interesting question that speaks to the context of the maritime environment writ large and not just the commercial shipping sector. And the question is, specifically to John, but anyone else can chime in as well if they have other thoughts on it. Energy efficiency regulations apply internationally to trading vessels greater than or equal to 4,000 gross ton or 400 gross tons. In the Caribbean, domestic trading is often conducted by vessels smaller than that, but are nevertheless those vessels are nevertheless emitting, in some cases, considerable amounts and pose a threat to the environment. Is IMO considering any work to address these smaller vessels and that sector of the marine environment and the maritime industry? And if not, who is? So John, do you want to take the first crack at that?
John, I think you may be muted.
There we go.
Okay. Yeah, thanks. I think we were both trying to unmute and mute there. So, yeah, no, that's a really good question. So, I mean, IMO does consider all vessels, but a lot of the regulations are. So, for example, when we do have the Energy Efficiency Design Index, for example, we do have more stricter targets for larger ships. I mean, there is understanding that the smaller ships are important as well, and that could be tackled in the future. But at the moment, it's just considering the much larger ships. And one of the other things I mentioned is the data collection system, and that we're looking at ships over 5,000 gross tons. And what it means is we're actually missing, 15% of the fuel consumption is lower than that 5,000 gross tons. So we're probably, in some cases we're missing up to 15%. But there are some reasons for this, and it is easier for, in general, it is easier for some of the large ships to kind of decarbonize, and use technologies on board their ships, things like waste heat recovery. With a lot of the smaller ships that are serving coasts, it can be more challenging because it might be smaller shipping companies and might not have, if you're just serving somewhere quite remote, you might not have the resources to help improve the efficiency of your ship. So that there are some kind of reasons like this that probably has, led to these current decisions. The other thing I was just going to say as well, actually, and the other thing is we do, IMO is, the regulation's international as well. So there's also a lot of domestic ships that aren't covered. If a ship sails between, two ports within the same country, then it probably won't have an IMO number, and it probably won't be, counted under the IMO. So there's this as well, like how we look at domestic and international voyages. So the fourth greenhouse gas study actually looked at classifying voyages in a more fair way as well, because you do get some international ships that go between two ports in the same country, and we count this as international emissions as well, because we do it by ship. So but there's other ways to look at that as well, like who's responsible for this. But yeah, as from an IMO perspective, we're looking at international emissions. Thank you.
Thanks very much. And I think that last point about potential for domestic or regional regulation is really important, because MARPOL Annex 6 sets the international benchmark, but it doesn't mean that there can't be more restrictive measures taken at the local, national, or regional levels. And that regional piece could be something that the Caribbean in particular may want to explore, because unlike, for example, the Pacific Islands, which are several days journey apart in some cases, the close proximity of the Caribbean makes it a much tighter community, where having standards that are harmonized across the region may be quite helpful, particularly for the smaller vessels that are engaged in inter-island transport. So it's something to consider and something to talk about. There's been some chat in the discussion section about societal pressure increasing on the private sector and sort of the relationship. And I think one thing that has come out of that is that we have to be very careful not to make this a one-way criticism, in that this is an interesting regulation for IMO, because yes, it sort of affects several people all at once. You have shippers, you have oil companies, and you have governments, all that have almost a co-equal stake in implementation of this, as well as all the other actors that we've talked about, from civil society to the full spectrum of the society. And I think, I started out by saying we all have something to learn. And one of the challenges in this space that I think is coming out of the discussion is the need for people to recognize the connection between this particular issue and their day-to-day lives. I often use the expression, no shipping, no shopping. And people sometimes laugh about that, and they take some time to think about it. But if 90% of world trade is happening by sea, and we are 100% reliant on that world trade for our way of life, we need to make sure that we are not only, yes, pointing a finger at polluters, but doing so in a way that nevertheless preserves what we need to have happening. And we can't just say, this is your problem, sort it out. It has to be a cooperative effect, so that we get the benefits out of shipping and minimize the harm. So I wanted to pose that as an open discussion topic. Vivian, I think you wanted to jump in on that.
Yes, thanks, Ian. I think as well, Darlin raised an important issue that the Caribbean economies are reeling from the impact of the pandemic. And how do we rise? How do we keep focus and not lose the traction that has been built over the last 4 years with implementation? And it is very difficult. And this is one of the reasons I chose to focus on non-governmental organizations, because I think they have a significant part to play. Within the maritime domain, within the Caribbean, we don't have a Caribbean Maritime Institute, a Committee Maritime International chapter. It's perhaps time that we probably start exploring forming one. I mean, amongst us, I can pinpoint 4 or 5 maritime lawyers, 4 of which have been trained by IMLE. You know, to start that sort of not just advocacy, but offering the expertise to the region. Recommendations coming out of our workshops included the creation of a regional hub of expertise of maritime legal drafters. You know, so these are things that we could probably offer pro bono to the region to enhance it. But what we need is the governmental buy-in to facilitate that. Nobody wants to spend a lot of time assisting in drafting legislation, assisting in creating policy, assisting even in the consultation process, and then it's not received. So what we need to have is a bringing of, on a meeting of the minds from the governmental perspective, from the business sector, from academia. And I understand from Raquel's presentation that that's exactly one of the things that the Climate Smart Accelerator is doing. So I'd like to ask her right now, is there an opportunity to feature a maritime agenda within your agenda?
Absolutely. I think, you know, not just is there an opportunity, maritime is solidly in our agenda. When we're talking about places like Barbados that is looking at full decarbonization of transportation by 2030, I think they're considering everything. And so while we haven't sort of actively tackled it, it is certainly something that we have within our remit and feel a requirement to help deliver. But you know, it boils down to how are we going to pay for it, and unless we figure that piece out, you know, it's always going to be something that's nice to have. And so we are working across the region with the public sector, with the private sector, looking at putting together PPPs, looking at creating special purpose instruments that have the ability to help us to figure out the financials around it. Because until, you know, once we do the protection of the create marine protected areas, for example, that creates something that is sellable on an international market. We have some really large international corporations that have indicated that they have carbon neutrality goals, and they can't do it just by continuing their business as usual. So how do we create those areas and use that as an opportunity to either fund reinforcement or to help the private sector make the changes that need to happen?
Does anyone want to jump in on that? I have some thoughts, but I'll hold fire until see if anybody else wants to speak.
I have a couple of thoughts, just related to discussion point. Not in particular the Climate Accelerator. Yeah, just like I think one of the things that's been quite interesting is just how many initiatives we have from companies coming together to try and get to zero emissions, and you know, so there's a couple I was just having a look at. So for example, there's a group of companies called the Getting to Zero Coalition, which is trying to get a ship with 0% GHG emissions in the water in the next decade. There's a thing called the Sea Cargo Charter, which is about sharing ship performance, so people can choose more energy efficient ships. There's also a thing called the Poseidon Principles, which is a group of banks is comparing. They're actually, they have models looking at the IMO strategy, and if the IMO GHG strategy changes, then their models change, and they use these models to see how energy efficient ships are, and then that is used. This information is used to finance ships. So it's also the investment as well is there, and they're starting to think more about GHG emissions rather than just think about the social aspects of making money available. It's about whether the ship is efficient or not. So there are there is some quite interesting initiatives there, and so we are aware of these, and from an IMO perspective, it's good to have, now we've got the initial strategy is saying that this is where we're going and what the level of ambition is, and it is a sign because a lot of work is needed from a lot of different parties to progress on this.
Thank you very much. And I think highlighting who else is operating in this space and doing things is really important. Other comments and thoughts? I'll share one thought, and maybe it'll spark a little bit more conversation, because I think the COVID-19 pandemic has shown us some things in the maritime space that are both interesting and terrifying. I think on the frightening front, the fact that there are 300,000 seafarers stuck at sea and have been for months unable to get off of ships, and there are 300,000 more trying to get onto ships, is a pretty good indication of how fragile our global economy is, and that is something that people are not understanding fully, and certainly governments have not prioritized. And I think it underscores the need for private sector involvement and civil society advocacy in bringing issues to light that are fundamental to our daily lives. As I said, no shipping, no shopping. If the entire maritime industry collapses or just has to stop altogether, we aren't going to have goods, we aren't going to have food, we aren't going to have things that we rely on. And that isn't yet very well understood. And so this situation presents potentially an opportunity for new actors, new agencies, new organizations to bring issues to light that have otherwise gone overlooked or unnoticed. And one example of that is the Port Authorities Roundtable. I don't know if you're familiar with it, but it was a group started by, Frederick might know of them, because the Maritime Authority of Singapore was actually one of the founders. And it brings together maritime authorities and particularly port authorities in key jurisdictions around the world. And it was an invitation-only group initially. And it started small, and it had grown between 2015 and the beginning of this year to 50 members. And what's really interesting is no one really knew about them. They didn't really have much of a role other than for internal purposes to share good practices with each other in an annual meeting that they had. But in 2020, they have issued now 2 declarations about how port authorities collectively will handle the COVID-19 pandemic. And that's been extremely helpful for helping to keep things moving. And so these fora, these opportunities for cooperation and collaborative approaches to common issues might have gone overlooked or unnoticed prior to this year, but the pandemic has highlighted some of the opportunities for working together. And when it comes to the IMO 2020 implementation, I think the same is true, in that there are a lot of actors who are doing good things on their own, but invisible to others. And I think this conversation is really important for trying to bring people together. I didn't know about the Caribbean Smart Climate Accelerator until today. I didn't know about what the women in the maritime sector in the Caribbean was focusing on, and learning these things helps spark ideas for how we can collaborate and bring them together. And to go to Raquel's point about funding, there's a lot of money out there, because at the end of the day, this is, again, about all of our lives and our daily goods. There's no amount of money that couldn't be brought to bear to fix some of these issues if everybody was really aware of them and had the will to address them. And the will only comes about when everybody's informed about what the issues are. So I hand back to everyone else to see what you think about that. But I do think we can capitalize in some ways on the sort of pause in normalcy to try and do something new and do something different. Other thoughts?
So I agree to some extent. I really do think that there is a lot of money available out there, Ian. But what we're seeing is that there's so often a mismatch between what the money is for and what the money is needed for. And so that's part of the work that we try to do is we curate projects and then we try and match it to donors' requirements, for example. We try to create instruments to fill gaps where the funding just doesn't match the requirements. And so I absolutely agree that the number one thing that we need to do is to create greater awareness and to create more education around what we're doing. But the second thing is to find a way to sort of figure out how do we get the things to actually work in tandem versus, there's money available to do something that nobody wants to do, for example, which happens all the time.
That is very true. Vivian.
You're on mute.
Sukjit, I think you were going to say?
Yeah, thank you, Vivian. And yeah, what I was just going to say is I'm looking at a very macro perspective here. And very rightly, what Ayan said was that realizing the problem. I think realizing the problem has to do a lot with, especially my experience in the last 7 years here in Caribbean, is how dependent we are on maritime shipping specifically, and how least we are aware of the importance of this important mode of transport, I would say. I mean, we need some work at grassroots levels where a school-going kid is aware, or anybody going to a supermarket can connect the item that how it is ending up on my shelves. So we know the importance. I mean, for a lot of time, as a sector, we have suffered from lack of visibility. I mean, I sailed for 20 years and nobody was aware of us once you are out of the port until you're calling next port. Even as seafarers, we were relaxed that, okay, once we are approaching the port, once we enter 200 nautical mile zone, we pull up our socks, right? So there is a lot to be done at the grassroots level where people can, connect themselves to this very important sector. So, yes, COVID-19 has presented us with, challenges, what we are seeing for first time, but at the same time, it has provided us an opportunity where we can start with a clean slate. We can say, okay, this is where we were going wrong, and here is an opportunity for us to, start with knowing that, yes, this could have been done in a better way, because for a lot we have been complaining that we can't do much about it, but now we have an opportunity to restart things in the way we always wanted it. That's all I wanted to say at this moment. Thank you.
Sukjit, I agree with that statement, and I think COVID-19, while yes, it has its challenges for all players within the sector, it is that chance to embrace new ways of doing things, as Ian was also saying. It's to look at things from a different perspective, see the other side, and really look at how you can achieve your goals by using means that are not normal. And we are hoping that also can be is to start thinking about solutions in a different way, solutions to the gender dynamic issues, solutions to the climate change issues, solutions to making ports and shipping more effective, right? And I think a big part of that, and a big part of what WEMAC does, is raising that awareness and building that understanding of the sector and its components, and building those partnerships from primary schools, secondary schools, and up into the private sector, non-governmental organization partnerships. We do have outreach programs that go into the primary schools and go into these grassroots sectors, as you are alluding to, and really kind of trying to raise the awareness of what maritime is and the importance of it, so that there's a wider understanding as well. So it's not just about the gender dynamic, but it's about including that diversity within the sector and making sure that, all our stakeholders know what it's about it, and getting that talent coming in, building those partnerships and collaborations to take things to the next step.
Vivian, did you want to jump in?
Yes, I don't know if it's possible to call out from some of our regional participants that we see here on my screen here. There are a number of them. I don't know if any of you would like to volunteer your input as to how you're coping and whether you do engage with different areas, with NGOs in terms of enhancing implementation. I'm going to call names if you all don't volunteer. All silence. I see Vinicia and Jillian here. We also have Rael and Thomas from Antigua. If we can get some sort of feedback from you all. This is what happens when you don't pay to fly them into the country and lock them in.
Good afternoon, everyone. Shantika here
Thank you.
From the Freeport Harbor Company. I know some time ago the harbor met with local port department, that's the government agency, just to get their standpoint on it and where they are. That's the most we did, and they told us that they are seeking to put in the legislation so that it can be enacted on a national level, and that's in the Bahamas. So that's the most that we did as a private port authority facility.
Wonderful, because we've seen, and as you know, some of, based on our results from the MTCC, the Bahamas Port Authorities have been very cooperative, and they are in fact private sector. And, you know, they are exemplars in what we can achieve with that cooperation from the private sector.
But, you know, I think the silence in some ways is a little bit telling. You know, this is an issue that hasn't gotten nearly as much attention since it's come into effect as it did before in some ways. It is amazing. I was invited to an event almost every week on IMO 2020 in 2018. It kind of trailed off in 2019. And this year, I think this is the first one I've even heard of discussing MARPOL Annex 6. And that kind of indicates to me, just, you know, I'm perhaps not as close to this as others may be, but from my angle, it's kind of fallen out of the conversation in some ways, and particularly as a result of the pandemic, it was pushed aside. And I think going to Captain Singh's point and to what we were just talking about and what Sarita said, you know, this is an opportunity for focusing attention on an issue that is solvable, is implementable, and that at the same time could be used to help facilitate some of the culture change, not within the maritime sector alone, but writ large, to recognize the importance of the maritime environment to our wider way of life. You know, I was very fortunate as a child that I grew up in Maryland, in the Chesapeake Bay area, and the bay at the time was in horrible shape. And in school, as a kid, we had U.S. Coast Guard coming, we had marine biologists coming, we had fishermen coming, we had sailors coming, all talking about save the bay. That was the expression everybody used. And it's colored part of my career because as a child, I was learning about the marine environment, its effect on my food, on you know, the way of life of people in my neighborhood, in my community, and that made a real impact. And I go to coastal communities and even, you know, where the water is physically right there and very obviously fundamental to life, the connection isn't necessarily made between the marine environment and life on land, and between shipping and life on land. And those two changes really do need to occur. And so I think this may be a great opportunity. And I'm mindful of time, so I want to make sure all the speakers get a chance to give their final thoughts. But are there any other questions from the floor? Do we need to, Vivian, I kind of look to you for timing. Is there any hard and fast restriction if anybody wants to say something?
Vivian, can I add some words here, please?
Yes, please.
Okay. So let me try to bring this whole thing into some perspective. Vivian started with a presentation and she had, I think it was 3.7 gigatons of CO2 emissions. That sounds like a lot. It is a lot, but it is not enough. The UN 2019 gap analysis shows to achieve the 1.5 degrees Celsius cap, we require a minimum of 25 gigatons reduction annually from now till 2050. So the 3.7 sounds a lot. Shipping is responsible for the approximately 1 gigaton of those emissions. But the fourth IMO GHG study, as John alluded to, recognized something significant, that the rate of domestic shipping emissions is increasing more than the rate of international shipping emissions, which means we need to address this. The IMO has the MARPOL Annex 6, the Annex with the regulations. We need to implement it at the regional and the national levels, because as I mentioned, the rate of the increase is more or heavily on the domestic shipping as opposed to the international shipping. And as John said, these emissions may not be necessarily captured efficiently or effectively under the IMO framework, and it must be done at the regional and the national levels. So yes, we could say that, or bring it into context, further into context, the Caribbean may be responsible for a very small fraction of those emissions. But take an example, and I always mention this in these seminars, take an example of the Marshall Islands and their approach, where every little counts, right? Everything we could do to reduce the GHG emissions associated with every sector. And as we know, the maritime sector, it is not really one that is in the spotlight, right? But everything that we could do from the sector side is important and is required. So we'll deal with a bit more of that in the coming webinar, in the other webinars, right? But I just wanted to add that into it.
Thank you, Stefan. I did ask that you would contextualize it, because I had no idea what it really meant in terms of the international contribution. So in terms of that, I mean, that was the percentage with respect to just engaging with one of the what is referred to as the non-party stakeholders and non-state actors in the form of cities. So, and of course, in the context of the Caribbean region, contextualizing cities as non-state actors is a problem in itself. But they still are responsible for a significant amount of local governance, where you can actually get a lot of low-hanging fruits if you were to focus on decarbonization as underpinning all your operations. So I know we're behind time, and I'm going to go over to Ian to wrap up.
Thanks very much. And I just want to give all the speakers, first of all, my most sincere thanks. And I'm sure I say that on behalf of all the participants. This has been a really engaging discussion. But I want to give you all a chance for your final 30 seconds of thoughts. And we'll go in reverse order. So we'll end with Vivian. We'll start with Sarita. So Sarita, do you want to share your final thoughts on today's discussion?
I think for me, what I would like to emphasize is that we all collaborate and work towards raising that awareness of what we do, so that we can capitalize on those synergies that we can create by working together to solve a common problem.
I think that's a fantastic point. Lisa.
Just to piggyback on what Sarita said, I mean, if we recognize that we are all connected, we all do need to work together, right? It's not a competition. Sometimes we get caught up in the economic side of it and think, oh, well, if I give my information to another party, then I'm going to be disadvantaged. But if we collaborate, we increase sensitization and awareness, continue to look towards the next generation and involve the youth from an earlier age, then we can make some significant impact going forward.
Fantastic points. Frederick.
Thank you, Ian. Before I give my final words, I'd like to say something about the issue of the domestic fleet. I think it is possible to, when carrying out the domestication, to just scale down whatever is in MARPOL Annex 6 and apply it to the domestic fleet, but in a way that is practical and effective. And with the assistance of IMO, it's possible to achieve that in the same way we achieved the safety of shipping for vessels in the inland waterways. Finally, I'd like to say that the collaboration of all is important in ensuring that MARPOL Annex 6 is ratified and effectively implemented to the benefit of all, and with the participation of everyone, including the state and non-state players. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Excellent points. Raquel?
I think we have a unique opportunity here to take a leadership role, as we are the ones who are on the forefront of climate change. And so the more that we can lead by example, the greater our potential to impact others to take the changes that we want to see them take in our own self-interest. So I'd really like to see us sort of dig deep and lead on this.
I would as well. Let's see, John, over to you for your final thoughts.
Yeah, it's harder to go after you guys because there were some quite good comments. Yeah, I think Sarita and Lisa had a very good point. Just about it is about working together, and we're all in a different position, but a lot of the, that's the only way we can really achieve this. Yeah, I also think there's been quite an interesting discussion on domestic fleets and versus international fleets. From an IMO's perspective, we regulate international ships, so we can't regulate domestic fleets, but there is still a link there that's quite important. One of the things, for example, is that ports, for example, they come under regional legislation, and if we, for example, if we do start looking at future fuels for shipping, then a lot of investment and things is going to be on land. So it's all connected. So it's quite important. Just finally, thank you very much for inviting me.
And thank you for sharing your insights. Vivian.
I will just wrap up by saying, I think we need to keep deepening the conversation so that we can come up and bring together the right people that would be committed to seeing projects and things that would be beneficial to the region, that will ultimately be able to attract funding for the necessary climate projects. So I think we can't be shy about having the conversations, and it's only when we are open with our discussions that we can create meaningful projects that can attract the funding, and Raquel can help us perhaps in meeting and matching the availability of the funding with the suitability of what is needed to the region. So I think we need to keep progressing the conversation, and as MTCC we will try our best to continue doing that. And I think there is a significant resource that I have not sensitized the entire participants here, is that Ian is an expert in maritime crimes. It kind of just went under the radar in his biography, but the type of insights that he may bring to the conversation, I would certainly be trying to include him in further conversations of this nature, because enforcement is another weak area, and I think there's considerable expertise to be had in terms of enforcement.
Well, thank you very much. And I'll actually just say that, beyond the criminal point, one of the things that I find interesting about MARPOL Annex 6 specifically is that it's the intersection of probably the two most competitive industries in the world, the shipping industry and the oil and gas sector. And neither of them likes to share, neither of them likes to be transparent about what they're doing. They're incredibly close-fisted and incredibly difficult to work with. And so if we had time, I'd share with you actually one of the incidents that happened in the United States, often called the Houston problem, in which I was involved in 2018, where the competitiveness of the two sectors made it so that nobody was even willing to share what had happened. Even though 200 ships went dead in the water, and there were all kinds of problems, nobody wanted to put their head above the parapet and become the focal point for any kind of future attack or even malign action. So it's a very difficult issue. I think it's a great one for doing what just came through in every single comment, which is working together collaboratively, cooperatively, and collectively. And it's been a pleasure to be here with all of you. And so I'm very happy to be a part of future conversations. But for now, I'm very happy to turn the floor back over to Captain Singh to wrap things up. So thank you all very much.
Thanks, Ayan, and all distinguished speakers. And most importantly, I would say the participants for staying with us in this our first webinar, Wednesdays, aiming at promoting the ratification and implementation of MARPOL Annex 6. Now, if I try to summarize, we may have been focusing on carbon neutral shipping in long term, but certainly the commitment to sustainability is certainly more than just ratification or implementation, and that's where all the collaboration and working together comes in. So sustainability certainly in maritime is no longer a nice to have, but it's very, very essential. And special thanks to those who joined us across the time zones. I would especially thank MTCC Africa and IMO, both for staying with us. And I also hope that all of you enjoyed these sessions. And if you feel any of your questions were not answered during the live event, either you can email us or we will get back to you within next day or two. You will also receive links providing access to all the slides and recordings of today's session. The email will also invite you to fill out the feedback survey to let us know what you thought about the event and what topics we should cover in future. You can follow us on social media for more details or our activities. And at this moment, I would also like to invite all of you to switch your videos on so that we can take a screenshot with all smiles. So can we just momentarily switch on our videos? And Michael, you will do the needful, please. Okay, so anyone else wants to join us in the picture, please switch on your video. Oh, okay. Okay, Michael, once you're done, please let me know.
Yeah.
I can't hear you, Michael.
Sorry, let me just get the second set because it's 2 tabs.
Oh, okay, okay.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, I'm fine. Yeah, we're good.
Devin, can you share the screen with our next set of activities dates? So I'll just. So as you can see, so please don't forget to join us next Wednesday at the same time to discuss the status of Sulfur 2020 compliance. We'll have the opportunity to hear different perspectives from port state control, flag state, ship owner and operator, and most probably bunker suppliers and fuel testing labs. So I look forward to see you all again at 1300 hours on 4th November 2020. So till then, I would say stay safe, stay healthy, and have a wonderful evening.
Thank you. And thank you.